Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Stephen Einstein, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the podcast. I am extremely excited to be here, as usual, and I'm looking forward to doing the next beatitude in Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount. It's definitely been a journey so far. I really enjoyed the revisitation of it for myself and really revisiting the spiritual principles that it talks about. Last week's was fantastic. Just the way we talked about the reaping and sowing and it's the common law of the universe, and I really do like how he picked the trait or virtue or principle quality of mercy, because it's such an important one and it's such a vital one to continue to practice ourselves as it was practiced for us. So I'm looking forward to today's, which is blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And that's a pretty substantial one, honestly, when you think about it in totality. It's one that has a lot of depth to it and a lot of understanding to it. So this is the copy of Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount I will be reading out of. This is from 1938. I think it was this one. This copy was printed in the U.S., if I remember correctly. Yeah, New York, Harper and Brothers Publishers. And for a little context, as of right now, we have not read the whole book. We've only read chapter 2, the Beatitudes, and we're doing them one at a time. So this week we are on the 6th Beatitude in the 2nd chapter. And I'm not entirely sure, but we might have to continue through this book. Just because he's made a couple of references to later on in the book, later on in the Sermon on the Mount, later things stated, and kind of being drawn to doing the rest of the book. So we'll see how it goes. We got a couple more weeks left of this, of course. So we'll go from there. So I will go ahead and read the Beatitude in its entirety here, and then we'll go back and we'll have a conversation a little bit about it. All right. So here we go. This is Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount, chapter 2, the Beatitudes. This is the 6th Beatitude. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. This is one of those wonderful gnomic sayings in which the Bible is so rich. It is nothing less than a summing up of a few words of the whole philosophy of religion. As usual in the scriptures, the words are used in a technical sense and cover a far wider meaning than we attach to them in everyday life. Let us begin by considering the promise in this beatitude is. Considering what the promise in this beatitude is, It is nothing less than to see God. Now, we know, of course, that God is no corporeal form, and therefore there is no question of seeing him in the ordinary physical sense in which one might see a human being or an object. If one could see God in this way, he would have to be limited and therefore not God. To see, in the sense referred to here, signifies spiritual perception. And spiritual perception means just that capacity to apprehend the true nature of being, which we all so sadly lack. We live in God's world, but we do not in the least know it as that. Know it as it is. Heaven lies all about us. It is not a distant locality afar off in the skies, but all around us now. But because we are lacking in spiritual perception, we are unable to recognize it. That is to say, we are unable to experience it, and, therefore, so far as we are concerned, we may have said to be shut out of heaven. we do contact a very tiny fragment of it, and that tiny fragment we call the universe. Tiny fragment we call the universe. But even that little bit we see, for the most part, all awry. Heaven is the religious name for the presence of God, and heaven is infinite. But our mental habit leads us to mold our experience into 3 dimensions only. Heaven is eternity, but what we know here, we know only serially, in a sequence called time, which never permits of our comprehending an experience in its entirety. God is divine mind, and in that mind there are no limitations or restrictions at all. Yet we see everything distributed in what we call space, or spaced out, an artificial restriction which continuously inhibits the constant regrouping of our experience that is required by our creative thought. Heaven is the realm of spirit, substance, without age or discord or decay, a realm of eternal good, and yet, to our distorted vision, everything is aging, decaying, wearing out, getting born only to die, blossoming only to fade. We are very much in the position of a colorblind man in a beautiful flower garden. All around him are glorious colors, but he is quite unaware of them and sees only blacks, whites, and grays. If we suppose him to be also devoid of the sense of smell, we shall see that a very small part of the glory of the garden exists for him. Yet it is all there, if he could but sense it. The limitation in us is known in theology as the fall of man, and as it arises from our using our free will in opposition to the will of God. God has made man upright, but he has sought out many invitations. Our task is to surmount these limitations as rapidly as may be until we reach the point where we can know things as they really are, experience heaven as it really is. That is what is meant by seeing God, seeing him face to face. To see God is to apprehend truth as it really is, and this is infinite freedom and perfect bliss. In this wonderful beatitude, we are told exactly how this supreme task is to be accomplished and who they are who shall do it. They are the pure in heart. Sorry, that was a mosquito. Been trying to get that guy for a while, and I apologize for the interruption. They are the pure in heart. Again, we have to understand that here are the words pure and purity must be taken in a very much wider sense than that is commonly allotted to them. Purity in the Bible means a very great deal more than physical purity, vitally important though that is. In its full and complete sense, purity is recognizing God alone as the only real cause and the only real power in existence. It is what is called elsewhere in this sermon the single eye. See, another one of those references. And it is the master key to life. It is nothing less than the secret escape from all sickness, trouble, and limitation, the overcoming or reversing, in short, of the fall of man. And so, our text might well be paraphrased something in this style. Blessed are they who recognize God as the only real cause and the only real presence and the only real power, not merely in a theoretical or formal way, but practically and specifically and wholeheartedly in their thoughts and words and actions, and not merely in some parts of their lives, but in every nook and corner of their lives and mentalities, keeping nothing back from him, but bringing their own wills in every last particular into perfect harmony with his will. For they shall overcome all limitation of time and space and matter, and carnal mind, and realize that and enjoy the presence of God forever. We note how clumsy any paraphrase of the Bible truth always sounds after the matchless grace and conciseness of the inspired text. It is a good thing for each one occasionally to paraphrase in his own language the most familiar texts of Scripture, for this will help him make clear in his own mind exactly what meaning he is attaching to the text. It will often serve to draw his attention to important things which he has hitherto overlooked. Note that Jesus speaks of the pure in heart. The word heart in the Bible usually means that part of man's mentality which modern psychology knows under the name of the subconscious mind. This is exceedingly important because it is not sufficient for us to accept the truth with the conscious mind only. At that stage, it is still merely an opinion. It is not until it is accepted into the subconscious mind and thus assimilated into the whole mentality that it can make any difference in one's character or life. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Most people, and learned people especially, have all kinds of knowledge that does not in the least affect or improve their practical lives. Doctors know all about hygiene, but live in an unhealthy way, notwithstanding. The philosophers who are acquainted with accumulated wisdom of the ages and assent to most of it, continue to do foolish and stupid things in their own personal lives and are unhappy and frustrated in consequence. Now, knowledge such as this is only opinion, or head knowledge, as some call it. It has to become heart knowledge, or to be incorporated into the subconscious before it can really change one. The modern psychologists, in their efforts to re-educate the subconscious, have the right idea, though they have not yet discovered the true method of doing so, which is by scientific prayer and the practice of the presence of God. Jesus, of course, thoroughly understood this, and that is why he stresses the fact that we have to be pure in heart. And there we go. Great reading. Again, I apologize for the mosquito slaying mid reading. Hopefully it's not symbolic of anything here. But that was just a fantastic beatitude. I really enjoy that one quite a bit. And the reason I like that one so much is it lines up a lot, as he referenced, with that part of Sermon on the Mount, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. That's what that James Allen book, As a Man Thinketh, is completely based and taken from, is that singular statement, and developed into this incredibly in-depth analysis and logical analysis of what that actually means. And when we talk about, well, we'll talk about it later on. So I like, he seems to have something at the beginning of every single one of these Beatitudes that really stresses the importance of it, like the summation of it. Like this last one he talked about, it's the underlying principle. This is true for all things. You know, this one, he said, this is the summing up of religion. I mean, that's another one of these huge statements that he'll make. I mean, there's so much that gets brought into that, you know, the summing up of religion. Like, there's a lot of biases people can associate with it. So it's interesting how he kind of goes into it. And then he promptly follows it with, we have to we have to define a couple of things first, right? We're talking about technical terminology that's really representative of much bigger and more broadly applicable spiritual principles. And I think that's interesting. I'm grateful that he does that, I guess. And the first part that he actually brings up is this for they shall see God, right? And he goes on to say he's not talking about physically perceiving God. He's talking, that's an important distinction to make, because logically speaking, and just in general, we really have to understand what that statement's representing, because God, the true value or understanding and weight of this power and source we call God isn't something we can quantify in our own minds. I think any God that I could actually have a clear conception or picture of, like a physical representation of in my mind, is not the God that we talk about in these teachings. If my mind can grasp it fully, then it is a limited image of God. That's why it's important to remember this when we're going through our days. I feel like there's a lot that's been lost. There's a lot of terms that are pretty negative, have negative associations, and just this I forget what the term it is, but this picture of God that's represented by in human form, and there's a word for it. I can't remember it right now, but to actually, I understand the symbology of it, but the reality is the term God isn't a name either, right? It is a term. It's a reference, not. It's what it is. It's not the title or the name of God. It's the power that word represents is what we're talking about. So we need to keep these things in mind, right? That power, that strength, that connection, that whatever your choice of understanding, right, isn't something that can be truly quantified and then held on to, right? It's immaterial, it's incomprehensible in the truest sense, and we need to keep that in mind. I think it's not like when we're talking about in this beatitude, for they shall see God. This is not a physical representation of God. There's a lot of false idols out there because of a lack of understanding around this. I believe, there's the general, like, lust and greed and money and things and other people. There's those false gods, but there's also the worship of a false representation of what God is too, right? So let's remember that can just as easily be an idol as anything else. But what we're talking about here is not to physically perceive God, because that's not possible. We're talking about a spiritual perspective. We're talking about spiritual perception, or the true nature of God, right? So we're spiritually seeing God. Now, that can be through people, that could be through action, that could be through a lot of things, but it's the adjustment of this perspective, right? So heaven lies all around us. We just can't see it. We had a couple pretty good things mentioned about heaven in this, and how we're actually living around heaven all the time. We're actually actively enveloped in what heaven is, if we could just see it, if we could just recognize it, right? Um, he says heaven is the presence of God. We're constantly surrounded by it if we would just turn to it and acknowledge it. You can do that today. You can do that in a moment. You can do that whenever you're in need. But it's better to just practice it all the time rather than just in a back pocket play, if I'm honest with you. So, but he says heaven is this presence of God, and that's limitless, and it's everywhere. And then heaven is the realm of the spirit. I'm actually just going to read from page 40, and because I really like the summation he gives here. We're gonna, if you have this one, it's a page 40 anyway. And this is about heaven again. Heaven is the realm of the spirit, substance, without age or discord or decay, a realm of eternal good. And yet, to our distorted vision, everything is aging, decaying, wearing out, getting born only to die, blossoming only to fade. So it's a almost like an existential crisis we're talking about here, nihilistic perspective, and just to say, like, what we see is death. What we see is potentially a pointless existence. What we can see is negativity and selfishness, self-centeredness. And he says in that first line, heaven is the realm of the spirit substance without age or discord or decay, a realm of eternal good, right? So when we look at things through a God-centered, selfless lens, we see everything is good. But when we go to selfish, we get, he calls it our own distorted vision here. Everything is aging, decaying, and wearing out, getting born only to die, blossoming only to fade. Like, very much just, what's the point, right? When we're left to that, we say, what's the point? We become disillusioned with the world in general, and then decide to take up a hedonistic, selfish, self-centered lifestyle because there's no other reason to live but to make me feel good right now with whatever I want, and I'll take from you what I need. So that's why it's so important to understand that we can actually find God, and we can actually find this presence around us at any time, anywhere, in all ways, right? And that's why it's important to understand this is a spiritual perception. How are you looking at things? He goes into a great example. I'm going to read the next paragraph after what I just read. We are very much in a position of a colorblind man in a beautiful flower garden. All around him are glorious colors, but he is quite unaware of them and sees only blacks, whites, and grays. If we suppose him to be also devoid of the sense of smell, we shall see what a very small part of the glory of the garden exists for him. Yet it is all here, all there, if he could just but sense it. And he's saying, like, the color of the flowers is lost in the blind man because he cannot perceive it. He might even be told that it's there, but without an actual change in vision, he would not be able to see it. Or the scent of a flower, the scent of a rose, the scent of a fresh garden in bloom, right? The scent of spring coming on, right? These have smells associated them. So if he's saying if someone's standing in a flower garden that's colorblind with no sense of smell, the beauty of that garden, the dimensions of beauty of that garden are lost on him because he doesn't even perceive it. Can't even absorb it. And and what Emmett Fox is doing is relating the presence of God in heaven is the flower garden, and we're the colorblind man with no sense of smell. We're standing in it. It surrounds us always. We must just choose to turn to it and see it. Yet it is all there if he could but sense it. You know, when I read this for the first time, and I've got some notes in front of me, it just reminded me of there's a lot of 12-step things that I get reminded of during this reading, and this one was that alcoholism and drug addiction is a disease of perception. And there's a book even called In the Recovery World, A New Set of Glasses, and it talks about how we're in the exact same place with the exact same people, but we found much of heaven, you know. And that's also talked about in some of the basic texts and everything. We have found much of heaven right here on earth. It's amazing how just the willingness to change how you see the world can bless you in ways that were just readily available to you to receive. That we were blocking ourselves from, not even always intentionally, but still in our own way. Disease of perception. And what he goes on to say here is this is all stems from our separation, what the people call the fall of man. Maybe original sin might actually fit here as well, right? But it's the understanding that we've separated ourselves from the presence of God, and then not because it's the presence of God has been removed or we could even get away from it, but we've stopped recognizing it, right? And to see God is to recognize it again, right? Is to recognize the truth that we are not separated from God. It's always available to us, God's strength and mind and divinity and his life and happiness and joy. All these great things that we can bring into our lives are right there waiting to be grasped, which is a really cool thing. So to see God is to face the truth of the reality and changing your perspective. Now we talk about the next thing, which is who will see God? How does this actually occur? It's the beatitude is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. For they shall perceive the presence of God around God and heaven around them always. Is what that means. So who is the pure in heart? What does that mean? And he immediately goes on to say, we're going to have to take a look at pure and purity. And what does that mean? And what does that actually symbolize in this way? What is that term referring to? And he first of all says physical purity. And it's not talking about just that, though. That is, what did he say? Purity in the Bible means a very great deal more than physical purity. Vitally important though that is. So we're still talking about physical purity in a lot of ways, conducting your actions in godlike manner, righteous manner, conducting yourself in all of your affairs. And that could be how you eat, how you take care of yourself, to sexual purity. It could even lead to that, or that is wrapped up in this. And he stresses how important that actually is. But that's not where it stops. Physical purity is vitally important, but that it is much bigger. The term pure and purity is much, much larger than just that. And he says purity in its full, and I'm just going to read it, in its full and complete sense, Purity is recognizing God alone as the only real cause and the only real power in existence. That's a big statement. Purity is singleness of focus on God for everything. A pure understanding of God's involvement, or what God is to you, or what God is to us, maybe is a better way to say that. God alone is the only real cause and the only real power in existence. Everything is of God and comes from God. And a lot of people don't like that when you say that. A lot of people get uncomfortable with that statement, right? So, it's something to keep in mind that we're going to that depth of reliance upon that God, or that God of our understanding, that power, that source, however you'd like to interpret that. But let's go. We'll just read this last. It is what is called elsewhere in the Sermon of the Single Eye, the Master Key to Life. It is nothing less than a secret of escape from all sickness, trouble, and limitation. The overcoming or reversing, in short, of the fall of man. So it's the reconnection with God, making God the sole focus of your heart and your intention, and functioning from that place, right? So purely and singularly God. That's what pure in this place means. And I have here, I wanted to read his a text might be well paraphrased in this. So he's going to paraphrase the beatitude of "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." This is his paraphrase. It's funny just because it's so long. When I hear paraphrase, I usually associate it to a shortening or similar length, different words, right? It's like way longer. Blessed are they who recognize God as the only real cause and the only real presence and the only real power, not merely in a theoretical or formal way, but practically and specifically and wholeheartedly in all their thoughts and words and actions, and not merely in some parts of their lives, but in every nook and corner of their lives and mentalities, keeping nothing back from him, but bringing their own wills in every last particular into perfect harmony with his will. For they shall overcome all limitation of time and space and matter and carnal mind, animal mind, basic desire for pleasures, and realize and enjoy the presence of God forever, which we now know means heaven. Right? The presence of God is eternal and limitless, and it is right around us at all times, so we can enjoy heaven now if we maintain purity in heart. And that was his entire paraphrase there. And I think it's funny because he openly admits, he's like, you can't, the eloquence of the Beatitudes always sounds clunky when paraphrased, right? And it's almost like he justifies his reason for doing it, because what he goes on to saying, everyone should do it to make sure they're getting the full understanding of what something actually means, right? And you can flush it out against the original text if you paraphrase it, and you can back apply it, So I thought that was kind of funny that he even mentioned that he can't emulate the eloquence of Jesus in this Sermon on the Mount, but that was his paraphrase, right? So a singular reliance upon God in all ways, in all areas of life, and the reliance upon that brings you into contact with the presence of God. These things that we're talking about right now, they're pretty big ideas, maybe the best way to say it, for people to swallow. They're pretty, at first glance, incredible. But I can guarantee you, with my personal experience, now I don't practice this beatitude perfectly, but the times when I can have a soul focus on the God of my understanding and the presence of God in my life, you can tell it feels different. There's a connection there, at least from my experience, that you can't emulate anywhere else. So it's a pretty important thing. So, but no, it's definitely interesting to see him actually try to paraphrase and then cover his tracks and say, well, I did the best I can. It's kind of hard to do. So, we go on to the last bit that needs to be defined in this beatitude, which is now the word heart. He says, note that Jesus speaks of the pure in heart. So we were just talking about purity. So that's the acknowledgement that God is the singular and sole focus of our lives and where everything originates from, where all gifts are taken from or given from. So pure in heart is next. And he immediately, which I think is very relevant to the self-help world today, to the just the health world, the mental health world. There's so many practices. There's so many other things that are going on right now. And it's just interesting to me because this is from 1934. And it was probably preached many times before that by him. And also James Allen wrote As a Man Thinketh in 1903. Right. So there's some ideas that have been long-standing ideas that are now really just being flushed out and vetted by pop culture, by self-help culture, by biology, and actual science to prove these things. So he immediately says that heart is what commonly in psychology is referred to as our subconscious mind, right? Which is like where things originate from, like where our intentions originate from, right? Some will, I'm sure some won't agree with that, but I tend to believe, I know from my experience that is true. What is being labeled as subconscious really is the heart and the intention and the understanding we have of what this means. So the heart is the subconscious mind. So he talks about the line, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are most issues of life, right? So we're talking about where the originating thoughts are coming from. We're talking about where we operate from. We're talking about what drives our active thoughts and behaviors, right? So there's a lot that goes into this. And he talks about also that to know it is to accept the truth in our active and conscious minds. Like this head knowledge, right? Like to know these things is one thing, but to actually believe it in our hearts is a whole nother, right? And to just know knowledge is not enough, because he goes on, and this is I'm sure everyone can find an example of an individual or one that they do themselves where they know the information and then have no application of it. They don't actually bring it in to themselves in a way that they're willing to practice on it, right? So he's saying that this head knowledge, right, is what we get into, is not enough. We have to bring it to our hearts, right? It has to go from the head to the heart. You'll hear that in recovery rooms and in 12-step rooms. You'll hear that in psychology, in a changing of belief structure and things like that, So there's a lot of things that go on that actually reference these types of understandings and ideas, right? To actually bring this into ourselves. So we have to bring it to our hearts and souls as well. That's the journey. People in the rooms will say the journey from the head to the heart is the longest road. So a journey from knowledge to belief and truth and faith and knowing is the most difficult part about this. And there's a line from one of the basic texts of a 12-step program that says, concede to our innermost selves. And that's what this is. That innermost self, that subconscious, that heart, that soul, that inner being is where we have to accept these things and these changes. It has to become the basis and source for our thoughts and our actions, right? It has to be where we function from, because if it's not where we're functioning from, we're always going to have to correct the behavior, because if it's not from where we're functioning from, we'll get thoughts, we'll think things that are not aligned with it. We'll think things aligned with our selfish and self-centered intentions, right? Or fear-based intentions, some like to call it. And then we'll want to take the actions on those thoughts. Instead, we have to correct the action. And it's exhausting, and we won't do it effectively all the time. We won't even realize where we need to do it more effectively. We'll have such a limited grasp of what it actually means. So what needs to happen to actually change ourselves, to change our character, to change our lives, is we have to accept this into our innermost being. We have to actually make this truth, this purity, enter into our hearts. This knowledge of the presence and power of God has to enter into our hearts. And that's where we need to operate from. So, it's something James Allen talks about regularly. And I've talked about it a lot on this podcast, actually, is the purification process. And it's in the order of way it works. And the way James Allen talks about it is the self-control comes first. So you change your outward actions. When you change the outward actions, you see the thoughts that precede them. You see the thoughts that drive them. Then you change the thoughts. And then when you change the thoughts, you see the intention behind the thoughts. You see where they're originating from. And that comes from the heart. And then you bring this different source to your heart. And then the changes are permanent. Then the changes are rooted and solid. And you're not fighting to correct yourself all the time. It just becomes natural. And that's the goal here, is to change your character and to change and purify your heart and your intentions, and to live a selfless, God-centered life, an others-centered life, rather than a selfish, self-centered life, fear-based. So, all right, well, there we go. That's it for today. We came in under 45 by just 1 minute. So thank you all for joining me. I appreciate it. And please go ahead and give the Facebook page a like if you'd like to follow us there, or like and subscribe here right on YouTube. We also are on Spotify if you want to follow me there. And you can watch the video, also gets uploaded to there, and then it's the audio is sent over to Apple Podcasts if you just like to hear the audio. So I appreciate all the support that y'all are giving me, and just hope you are all enjoying the message. So next week we will do Blessed Are the Peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Sounds like another wonderful one. I actually remember reading that the first time and really enjoyed what that one had to say, so I'm glad to revisit it next week. So thank you all again for joining me today, and until next time, thanks.